Me and two of my friends ate a tablespoon of Jimson seeds, which we found around where we live. A couple of hours passed, and I didn't believe anything was going to happen, and I went back home and laid down. Then, bam! It hit me. The whole world began to become just like an intense LSD trip. Then I was gone. I escaped my body. I had a near-death experience. I traveled to other worlds, spirit worlds, and other creatures' worlds. I remember being on a planet like Mars, all red sand and weird rock formations. I was lost, and they were really amused with me, as I was with them. The aliens, that is. They had big heads, tall, skinny, long arms, and legs. These creatures studied me, but not with the equipment with their large eyes. I also remember seeing transparent spirits among Earth, then a bright light, and the most beautiful music I've ever heard. To put it short, I visited heaven. I saw white-robed monks floating around. As of this point of time, I don't remember the conversation I had with these angels, but I did have one. While I was in these other worlds, I had no control of my body. My mother told me I didn't even know who she was or anyone else. She said I was crawling around the house, saying I was looking for buds and picking at the floor. I don't remember any of this whatsoever. That happened before the ambulance got there, and it took 8 big cops to restrain my little ass and strap me down. I don't remember this either, or the ambulance ride. The hospital, from the little I remember, was hell. The doctors were treating me like total shit, but since I wasn't in my body, this didn't bother me much, and I wondered how much worse they were treating me. The insights I got about life after death were great, but it's something us humans are not prepared to see while on Earth. My suggestion is not to do it unless you're really into out-of-body experiences and interested in them. Out of my 5 friends, 4 of us went to the hospital and got treated like total shit. There is a life after death. During the summer of 2008, some of my friends and I had discovered a source for mushrooms and decided to try some. But we all started separately. My first couple times were pretty uneventful. I would have moderate visuals, experience time dilation, and had a lot of fun with music. The most trippy song that I found was 3 Libras, All Main Courses Mix by APC. The third time, however, was different. Before this, I was caught unaware that there was also psilocybin in the stems as well. So I had only been taking about half of an eighth. Coming up was just how I had become accustomed to, until I had reached my previous threshold, and I kept coming up. At this point, I began to notice geometrical patterns in the white parts of web pages. The patterns began to form words, but I can't remember what they said. At this point, I was expecting to plateau, but I was incorrect again. I began to feel like I was leaving my body, even though I was still in my room. In my new awareness, I began to hear voices of people observing me. I would ask questions about where I was, but I would always get vague answers. I felt completely comfortable in this situation, like I already knew where I was and what was happening. Everything was oddly familiar, even though throughout my daily life I had never seen such a place. Knowledge was in some way flowing into my head, and I began to realize that I had become the embodiment of the universe. I had become the self-aware universe, and I was waking up for the first time in ages. My observers were all a part of me. So were all of my surroundings and everything that I could see. We were all moving towards something big and wonderful What it was, I still haven't been able to figure that out to this day. And I wasn't getting any answers from the people with me, because they were a part of me and thus had no knowledge either. Time at this point had no meaning, no existence. Every piece of knowledge in existence was available to me, but it felt like there was only so much that my monkey brain could comprehend. This new world that I had discovered began to fade as my soul was being poured back into my body. As I started to come down, I decided it was a good idea to try to get some sleep, but the shrooms always have a stimulant effect on me. At this time, I had no idea what had happened. I had not done enough research into shrooms to know about the dissociative effects, and this scared me off. I had no idea how to comprehend what happened to me. However, I have found comfort in knowing that this is pretty normal for a hard trip. I can't wait to take some again. Next time will be with a couple of my trusted friends. My first experience with astral projection came about 3 years ago when experimenting with the pharmaceutical known as amitriptyline. I was 15 years old and out of school on summer break. I decided to spend the day with a close friend of mine who lived nearby. We had planned the day to make lunch, watch some movies, and listen to some music. I arrived at my friend's house at about noon with a box of macaroni, my CDs, cigarettes, and a lighter. When he greeted me at the door, he did so by telling me of some interesting little pills he had come upon. Amitriptyline. After some explanation, I was quite interested as well, and eager to take the pills. We walked back to his room. He took a small pill bottle out of the closet, opened it, and took a handful out, and halved it between the two of us. I took 3 of the 4 75 milligram tabs he gave me, planning to take the other in the peak of it all. We decided it would be a good idea to go outside and smoke a bowl with 1 pill crushed atop of the weed, while we were waiting for the effects of the pills to take place. After smoking, we came inside to watch a movie. I was standing in his living room, picking a good movie to watch, about 5 minutes after coming inside, and probably a half hour after ingesting the pills orally, when suddenly, everything started to shift, and I felt like I lost all control of my motor skills. The next thing I remember was lying on his couch, watching How High. I looked over at him, asleep on the floor, and noticed that it was dark outside. I had no idea how long it had been, and I'm trying to wake him up. I realized and was completely aware that I could not do so because I was speaking complete gibberish in a whisper, and there was nothing I could do about it. I then, for some unknown reason, tried to contact my grandmother on the telephone to tell her that I needed help. When my friend's mother walked in to find me on her couch trying to make a phone call with my shoe, and my eyes rolled to the back of my head. In a panic, she immediately called my house, not the ambulance, knowing we experimented with drugs often, and not knowing what I or her son, who was passed out on the floor, had taken. When my cousin came to pick me up, I tried to get in his truck by crawling in the window. When we arrived at the house less than 5 minutes later, he left me in the truck knowing if I came inside, there was no way I could hide the extremities of how delusional I was at that point. He proceeded to try and cover for me by telling my uncle that I was very tired and fell asleep in the truck. My uncle believed him until he took a look outside, only to see me getting undressed in the bushes. After coming outside to get me, I yelled and argued with him to get out of my room while still getting undressed in what I thought was my closet. Somehow, eventually, I ended up inside on the couch being interrogated. When I got home, I only had one shoe and none of the things I had left with. I remember being very dehydrated and sleepy, and knowing if I only had some water, chapstick, and sleep, I would be just fine. With every question being asked to me, I remember saying, "I didn't take anything, I just need some water and chapstick," and proceeded to try to sleep. I kept being woken up, and no one would let me get water, let me sleep for a second, or move. I was confined to the couch. I remember growing very quickly annoyed by all of this, and just wanting to be somewhere else, when suddenly, out of nowhere, brightly colored cartoonish mushrooms and flowers started sprouting up out of the living room floor, which was not the living room floor anymore, and the butterflies in my peripheral vision were catching my attention so much that I got up and started chasing them. I have no way to be sure, but I would say this was probably about 8 hours after taking the pills. The next thing I remember was chaos. I came back to in an ambulance with a very gentle voice asking me if I was afraid of needles. I remember wondering why someone would wonder such a random thing, then feeling the sudden prick of the needle, and then knowing why. At this point, I was falling in and out of consciousness, but yet being completely aware that I was not conscious, watching everything that was going on from above my body and then completely blacking out. This went on for about 3 hours, and for some reason, I was very calm through all of this. When I was in astral projection mode, I guess you can call it, I remember being directly above my body to begin with, like standing in front of a mirror. I was going in and out of this astral state for a while, and then it came on much stronger. I could move and to some degree understand what was going on, not just see it like before. I remember being by my bedside along with my grandmother and a few doctors and nurses, trying to figure out what exactly they were doing to me and why everything was so chaotic. I then remember seeing my friend on a stretcher being hauled through the emergency room in the same chaotic manner they had handled me. I followed them to see if he was okay. He looked fine, and as far as I could tell, he was. They got him to his room and started asking questions that I couldn't make out, and made him drink charcoal. I remember thinking that he must be okay if he could drink it, because I watched them shove a tube down my throat for the charcoal. I was then very suddenly right above my body again, and that's the last thing I remember before I came back to for the final time that night. When I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital bed, puking my guts up all over everything, and I was accompanied by a very rude nurse who was yelling at me for puking on her, and for some reason, the bitch wouldn't let me move my hands at all. I tried to wipe my face, and she just yelled more and more. We left the hospital soon afterwards. All I remember at that point was being so relieved that I could finally go to sleep. I fell asleep in the car, and the only thing I remember before I woke up in my grandmother's bed to her checking my pulse and crying was changing clothes for bed and finding that peak pill still in my pocket, and then having a quick flashback of the whole thing. I had a migraine and my heart was pounding. I knew something was seriously wrong by the look on her face. My grandmother then proceeded to tell me that my heart had been tacking out all night, which means it would beat very fast and heavy, and then not at all. For about the next month, I woke up with horrible migraines and severe chest pain every day. I have never experienced chest pains or migraines like this before. Here it is 3 years later, and I still get migraines and chest pains from time to time, but it has lessened over the years. My friend didn't have the same harsh reaction to the drug that I did, but he was also bigger than me and had taken the pills before. Nevertheless, it was definitely a drug like no other. Neither one of I wanted to touch ever again, and wouldn't suggest them for a fun time to anyone else. When I was a teenager, I was climbing onto the ceiling of my friend's garage when I slipped and fell, smacking my head hard against the concrete floor. When I was unconscious, I was transported to a black void, which was empty of all life. The only thing that existed in this vacuum was a tiny pinpoint of life, which was my soul, consciousness. An unseen alien entity began communicating with me telepathically and showed me what eternity felt like, if you can imagine that. This entity began mocking me, trying to convince me that my life had been nothing but an illusion. It convinced me that my life had never been real, that it was a fake experience being manufactured by something or some other power that I could not fully understand. My consciousness became flooded with an overwhelming sense of loneliness and despair at the thought that my life had been nothing more than an illusion. This being convinced me that I was going to be in this void, empty of life and light, for eternity. Alone forever, living out eternity, consumed by a sense of loneliness and despair. The intensity of these emotions is hard to put into words, but I can only describe them as torture and eternity combined into one. I could feel eternity, if that makes any sense. I came to after a brief period of time and walked home in a daze of sorts, emotionally scarred by the whole experience. It was a hellish godlike experience, a meeting between myself and another power of some sorts, and it left me with many unanswered questions about the true nature of our reality. The experience was so life-changing that I struggle with it to this day, many years later. I'll start this off with my previous experience with psychedelics. I have done LSD, shrooms, Hawaiian baby wood rose seeds, and some light dissociative use. I've done LSD many times before, and the highest dose I had ever done was 1200 UG, closer to 1000 due to tabs like being lighter and a little tolerance. I've done shrooms one time at around 4 to 5 grams, and that was very difficult, but that's a story for another time. Hawaiian baby wood rose was nothing notable, and my dissociative use was very limited. This was my first experience with 4-HO-MET. My plan when going into this trip was to take the LSD and the 4-HO-MET at the same time, and before I started to peak, I was planning on vaping some desochloroketamine. I found out later that this was 2-FDCK, so I would have felt little to no effects. I had no real deep purpose going into this trip besides wanting to have a crazy one. I had a problem with my scale, however. Anytime I would put the powder onto the scale, the reading would go crazy and not even have somewhat of an accurate reading. I said fuck it and filled a size 00E capsule a little less than a quarter of the way full. I hadn't had the slightest clue of how much I took at the time. I got a new scale after this trip, and I'm guessing the dose was at least 50 to 60 milligrams, but that is a conservative estimate. At 9:45, I ingest the pill and I put the tab under my tongue. I started my stopwatch and took a shower. At 10:15, I came back to my room and realized how messy it was. I hate tripping with a messy room because it messes with my vibe, so I start to pick things up and put them out of sight until my floor seems appealing. I'm starting to become more and more confused. I pick up my vape with the DCK in it, and I take one hit and try to take another. I didn't have it in me to take another because of how intense the headspace was getting. I set my vape down and lie down. I'm sweating, cold, and feel nauseous. I'm starting to see the most intricate and intense visuals I've ever seen in my entire life. There are no more timestamps because the time dilation was so pronounced, and I'm sure I couldn't read it even if I tried. I'm laying down and starting to really feel it. I felt similar to how I did on mushrooms by playing with my hands and reaching my arm in the air for minutes at a time. I'm trying to tell myself that I'm fine. I'm laughing and I'm doing all I can to keep the trip light. I was trying to submit, but I didn't even know how to do that. This next part of my trip gave me chills 24 hours later when I remembered it. I had red LEDs in my room and I felt like a being was digging into my brain. Not physically, but how psychedelics can drill into the inner self. I'm seeing what can only be described as some sort of psychedelic carnival. It was very bright and colorful, and again, intricate. My mind starts to focus on a girl. She is drawn in black and white in contrast to the sea of visuals. She is curled up in a ball shaking, and I sensed that she was on mushrooms. My mind felt like it was circling around her, and I see her face. It was a horrific smile, one that you would see in a bad horror movie. The smile was drawn on her as well, but it was stretching past her face. I had the strong feeling that I was the girl at the end of the visual. This ended, and I tried my hardest to turn the red LEDs off. I eventually did after fiddling with it for a little. I faced my ceiling with the intention of riding it out like most of my trips. My walls and my peripheral vision start to fade away, and so do the colors for a brief while. I was stuck in some place I never want to go back to. There was nothing, and I was nothing. I felt alone and scared. I was panicking hard and somehow came back to my body in my room. I was then tossing and turning for what felt like hours upon hours. I felt like the trip would never end and I would be tripping in public the next day. I start to feel more associated with my ego and realize I had to use the bathroom. My visuals are still going strong, but I can still see. I was in the bathroom as quick as I possibly could have been in there. I come back to my room feeling fatigued as hell. I look at my stopwatch and only an hour and 45 minutes had passed since I took everything. My heart sank and I felt like it was just about to start again, and I started to anticipate another wave of terror, but it never came. I was just scrolling through my phone, happy as ever. I fell asleep from the fatigue in about an hour and woke up feeling almost normal. I was very confused about the acid because I knew for a fact I didn't have bunk tabs, and I fell asleep after maybe 3 hours. It was very weird, but I chalked it up to the fatigue from the 4-HO. Moral of the story is I shouldn't ever eyeball drugs, especially super potent psychedelics. This is my documentation on what happened September 19th, 2009. It started off with me waking up, excited about the coming day. The night before, a friend and I scored 23 grams of mushrooms off a very good friend of mine. I was just waiting for a call to go pick them up. At about 4 p.m., my friend gave me the call, so I headed on over there. I got there, and we just hung out a bit. We left at about 5:30 p.m. and met up with another friend of mine who was also going to share this experience with us. We met up and went back to my house so that we could start the trip. When we got back, it was me, Asia, and a sober friend just kind of hanging around, just in case anything went wrong. At some point later in the night, one of my best friends, M, also came over. I would like to now say what my intentions for this trip were. I wanted to experience something completely mind-blowing, something mystical. I wanted to focus my attention on my theories and beliefs to show myself that I am heading in the right direction with my ideas. That is not exactly what happened. I was disrespectful, and the moment one doesn't respect a substance, that's when one is in for a ride. The house was open that weekend, so I had decided that I was doing something. Originally, I was told that the shrooms were a no-go, so I was thinking a high dose of dextromethorphan, or possibly a contemplative trip on 2CI. So, basically, I wanted that spiritual experience then, but that is why it didn't happen. My plan for the shrooms was to take a high dose and meditate, and I was looking forward to it. What happened was, I was readying myself for it. I hadn't eaten the entire day so that I wouldn't experience too much nausea and the effects would kick in sooner. I was with my friends, preparing to eat the shrooms while debating on how much to take. Asia had 4 grams, R decided to take 7, and I was debating between 5 to 7. Eventually, I decided 7, and I knew that it was a dumb idea. I started feeling the effects within 10 minutes of consuming them. At that time, the sun was going down, so I went outside to watch, while I waited on the effects to kick in a bit more. I went and sat down on a chair that was put on a little built-in wooden patio. It was right on the lake, and the sight was beautiful. The clouds were swaying and distorting, the color of the sunset was reflecting off of everything, and the lake was a shimmering, translucent body of water. While I was watching, a tiny little dog came over and started barking at me, which didn't bother me. But then my neighbor came over to get him and started talking to me, which kind of freaked me out, since I was on 7 grams of mushroom and everything was starting to distort. Luckily though, he didn't stay all too long. R then came out and joined me, sitting in the chair next to me. After a few more moments, Asia, Mr. Sober, and M came out to talk. M is a very good friend of mine, so I was glad that he was there. The only problem that I have with him is that he's never done a drug, so he ends up talking to me, acting like I'm dumb. But that hopefully won't be the case sometime soon. I'm going to bring him out in nature with some shrooms so that he can experience the majesty. But, continuing on, Sober and M went back inside to play Super Smash, leaving me, R, and Asia admiring everything. I remember Asia then saying, "Everything is so trippy here." He then went back inside. At this point, the mosquitoes were coming out and it was getting pretty dark, so he decided to go in as well. When I stood up, that's when they really hit me hard. Everything distorted on me in such a radically different way. I looked over at R, amazed by what was happening. He had turned purple, and nothing outside seemed like it was right. We proceeded to head inside, which I found very difficult. It was hard to do anything. M saw this as well, and he said, "Hey, you okay? You seem to be having trouble standing." I thought I was going to pass out. It had hit me so hard. I had gotten extremely tired at this point, probably having to do with nothing to eat the entire day. But it was also extremely harsh on my body. I can't even explain what it was like, but I had thought that I might have been sold some mushrooms that may have had some poison. I had read about mushrooms that have poison in them, such as the Amanita muscaria, how they are fine unless taken in high doses, or something similar, although I could be wrong altogether. The point is, I thought I may have poisoned myself, so I thought I needed to get some food inside me to help absorb some of the poison, if there was any. A friend grabbed me something which I took a bite out of, spit it out, and decided that I didn't care. Then, something strange happened. I had the most overwhelming urge to pee, so I went to the bathroom and attempted to do so, but it was impossible. While I was in the bathroom, I decided to sit down on the tub, which I ended up falling into, and I just sat there. While I was in there, some more friends popped over, both on shrooms. They opened the bathroom door and found it funny, me sitting in the bathtub. Then they left me alone and started watching Taken in the living room, while I just sat there for a few moments. It was very strange, my visual perception. It was like looking through a broken windshield. Everything was cracked and fractured. But I then got up and went to lie down in my room with the lights off. That is when I experienced the most amazing, yet, at the same time, most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. I didn't think that I had died. I didn't feel like I had died. I did die. I was pure consciousness. I had no body. There were no surroundings. My room was completely gone. I had no physical body, yet there was still substance. I understood time in a way I never had before. Time had no meaning, yet it was so very prevalent. I had felt that I had discovered some secret truth, but I can't remember it for the life of me. But the thing is, while I thought about it in that state, I knew that I would forget. I realized that I wasn't allowed to remember. I realized that everyone would come to know this secret, that everyone at some point is shown. Then they too will also forget. The last bit I remember is that I found it funny. It seemed absurd. It seemed like it was some kind of cosmic joke. I remember thinking about Huxley's theory of mind at large. I understand why he thought that psychedelics, meditations, sense deprivation, etc. would allow access to an area that is normally blocked off by consciousness. If a man was stripped of everything and thrown into that state without preparation, they would easily be overwhelmed. Then I remember M coming into my room and talking to me. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was there. I remember him asking me if I was becoming one with everything, and all I can think was, if you only knew. After about 2.5 hours of this, I came out of this amazing state. My friends all flooded into my room with the lights off, and we just had a great time. The energy in there was amazing, but something strange that happened was that I couldn't see anyone's face. I saw everyone with fiery auras. It was kind of like in StarCraft, the Dark Archons. It wasn't threatening or anything of the sort, just kind of strange. Eventually, the sober people had to go home, and everyone else, except Asia, who was out on the patio, tripping on my couch, decided to go see 9. I didn't want to be left alone at my house, so I went as well. We got there and went to watch the movie, but 15 minutes into, I realized that I shouldn't be there, so I went outside and wandered. I saw 2 brothers who were smoking out in their car. When they noticed me, they kind of freaked out. One of them told me that he works there, that it's nice, and he gets to see movies for free. I didn't really want to talk to him, so I said that I would leave them to do what they were doing. This part of it was kind of nice. He said that his brother doesn't smoke. I believe he was lying, but seeing that kind of thing was nice. I continued to walk around, and I was appreciating the little bits of nature that was in the area. I started to think about the universe, nature, and man-made objects, how beautiful nature is, and how it grows. Then looking at man-made objects, such as buildings, they may have been nice once, but once it starts rusting or getting old, we leave it to die. We take out so much in the world for things that we believe we need, only to let it fall in disrepair 10 years later. But all in all, it ended up being all right. I got home at about 4 in the morning with Asia still on my couch. I stayed up a little bit longer and started turning everything off at 5 a.m. Asia woke up and told me that he had just stopped tripping. I told him to analyze what had happened and that we would share stories at some point. He then left my house, and that's how it pretty much ends. I have been shown something that I was not expecting. I went into it with the wrong attitude, and the shrooms decided to throw me exactly what I wanted to see, and even further. I was not prepared, but I plan to try it again at some point, thinking I will go over to one of my favorite nature reservations and find a quiet place for meditation, then most likely some exploration afterward. But this experience was the single most amazing, yet most terrifying experience of my life. I have been humbled because of this experience. I have used DMT many times. I have used many drugs many times, and they have used me equally as many times. That being said, I am a very experienced psychonaut. This experience happened due to silliness and arrogance, and for both of these, I paid the price twofold. At the time of the experience, I had just come home from having what I'll call a DMT party. I had scored a large quantity of it, about a gram, and because it's DMT, I feel that it should be given away rather than traded or sold. All day, I had been surrounded by people under the influence, each one taking their turn one at a time, and as such, I had my own need to at least take a small journey into the world of DMT. I arrived home around 3 a.m. and took the bowl that had been used all day by various people for many great experiences and loaded what I would call a museum dose into it. My intentions were to go into a mildly psychedelic state and meditate before bed. The chemical had other intentions, however. I was alone, laying on a small bed in my basement when I took the hit. Immediately, I knew that this was no museum dose by the taste, and that familiar thought of, "Oh well, here we go," popped into my brain. The sound of plastic being torn shot through my head, and then the familiar shaking whoosh blew up in front of me, and so did my ego. Quite quickly, I was removed from reality, removed from my basement and my body. My eyes could have been open or closed at this point. Honestly, at that much of a dose, it does not matter. I was thrown into a very nightmarish area in a matter of seconds. My brain had been split into infinite pieces. It wouldn't be accurate to say that I saw all of this, though. It was as real as anything you see every day. It is truly better to say it was an experience. It was as though my mind had become a fractal, with each span and section managing a different function, each one computing a mathematical equation beyond that of human comprehension. One part for a piece of muscle to push the blood through a part of my heart, another collective of pieces to regulate each section of my digestive tract, and infinitely more parts to slowly perform the action of simply laying on a bed. The familiar self-transforming machine elves appeared in the space I was in and were pointing and laughing. It wasn't a happy experience to my brain to see and hear this time around. At this point, I may have blacked out or been overwhelmed by pure horror or imagery. When I came to, I was still heavy under the influence, but not peaking any longer. Slowly, I found a part of my brain, a large part, that was filled with trepidation and regret for trying to be narcissistic enough to see a museum dose. At that point, it was as though I had accepted death and all its ugly facets, and finally, things became more benevolent. When I came out of it, My pants looked more like camo than cargo, but I knew I had survived the experience. I realized my error very quickly then. The bowl must have been caked with DMT from earlier that day. This experience was horrifying and absolutely shocking, but at the same time, I am glad it happened. I am glad that I was so humbled by this teacher and that I would never take anything for granted again. I have not had a panic attack since. I had chronic panic attacks almost daily since I was 16, and I still feel as though I have accepted death.